Good morning. We will go ahead and call our Tennessee Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations Education Finance Subcommittee to order. Thank you all for being here, those who are in person. Thank you for Chairman Hicks joining us via online. We're grateful for all of these. And I will immediately turn the microphone over to Director Lippard. Good morning.
Morning. Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I want to thank you all for agreeing to serve on this subcommittee and for being here today. As you will recall, at our June 2025 TACIR Full Commission meeting, during the presentation of our annual fiscal capacity model, there was a great deal of discussion and some concern expressed over three things that are causing changes in the county area fiscal capacities within the model. And those three things being virtual students and they're being recorded, for their average daily membership being recorded in the county where the school is located rather than the county of residence. Then also the valuation of Greenbelt property. And then finally, the presence of large tourism industries. And so because of those concerns, Chairman Yeager proposed and the Commission agreed to appoint this ad hoc subcommittee to discuss these issues and then to report back to the full Commission at our next meeting. So what we're going to do today is you're going to hear from Research Associate Ismail Tanwi, who's going to discuss the virtual students. And then we'll hear from Research Director Michael Mount, who will discuss the Greenbelt and the tourism factors. Before we do that, though, I'm going to just give you a quick refresher on the model to kind of set up this discussion. And then I'm going to go ahead and give you the bottom line, our conclusions. And then Ismail and Michael are going to go into the weeds and go into considerably more detail, and then we'll discuss and answer any questions on that. And I'm also going to offer a couple of caveats before we start. But if you should have a copy of the handout. This is the handout titled Memorandum Education Finance Subcommittee. All three tabs that are mentioned in the agenda are included in this actual memorandum. You should also have a copy of the PowerPoint, which Ismail will be using as he goes through the virtual students. But that same information that's in the PowerPoint is also included in your memorandum. If you'll turn to page 2 of that handout, figure 1 shows the fiscal capacity model components and factors. And just as a reminder, the TACIR fiscal capacity model uses an ordinary least squares multiple linear regression to calculate the per pupil fiscal capacity for every county area in the state of Tennessee. And this is for county areas, so every school system, every LEA within that county area will has the same fiscal capacity. This model is, the results of this model are not always intuitive. They can be counterintuitive because the interreaction, the interplay between the variables used in the model, the linear regression is capturing the effect of all the variables used and also the way those variables interact with each other. And that's probably why in 2007, Governor Phil Bredesen, when he was introducing BEP 2.0, referred to this model as the work of mad scientists. So it can be a little confusing. But real quickly, if you look down the left side of figure 1, you see the components that are used in the model, and down the right side you see the factors or the variables that we use to measure those components. And the dependent variable, the thing we are using the other variables to determine their predictability, is local revenue, which we measure using own source revenue per pupil. We use a 3-year average for this. We actually use a 3-year average for each of the variables, and that's to help smooth out any year-to-year changes, any major shifts from year to year. The independent variables include first the tax-based components, which are 2 variables: taxable sales per pupil and property per pupil, and then an ability to pay measure, which is per capita income; resident tax burden, which is the ratio of residential and farm assessment to total assessment; and then a service responsibility measure, which we'll hear more about here today, which is the ratio of average daily membership to population. And then, like I said, the output is fiscal capacity per pupil. I mentioned a couple of caveats. One is that our model is only one of two models that are used actually in the equalization of fiscal capacity. The other model is produced by the University of Tennessee Center for Business and Economic Research. Another important point is that while under the old funding model, the state's old funding model, the BEP, the Basic Education Program, the entire state amount was equalized. Under the TISA, the current model, it has four components, which are base funding, weighted funding, direct funding, and outcomes funding. Only the base and weighted funding components are equalized. The others, the state pays 100%. So that is a difference in the models. Diving into the conclusions from the staff analysis, and staff has spent a great amount of time providing the information contained in the memorandum for you today. But the bottom line is, as for virtual students, and let me say this first about virtual students. When we looked at virtual students, we are only looking at the effect of where they're ADM, where they're recorded for ADM purposes on the fiscal capacity model. We did not attempt to analyze the effectiveness of virtual schools, the benefits of virtual schools, any problems associated with virtual schools. We're looking at just the funding ramifications of where the students are, where their attendance is recorded. So what we found, like we said at our last commission meeting, that these students can increase the host county service responsibility. So they can cause the fiscal capacity for the host county to go down. And when they cause the fiscal capacity of the host county to go down, the effect is that the fiscal capacity, all things being equal, goes up for other counties. And that's like we discussed at the last meeting. But we also found that including the students in the fiscal capacity calculation can increase the fiscal capacity of a county that hosts a virtual school, which then, all things being equal, causes other people's fiscal capacities to go down. And it depends, again, on the relative weight of these other variables that are used in the model, and those weights change every year as they react with each other, and the underlying data changes. So that's what we found on virtual schools. On Greenbelt, we found that a decrease in residential or farm assessment because of Greenbelt, or any other factor, any other reason, can increase or decrease the county's fiscal capacity. So it's not a clear cut; it always goes up or it always goes down. And then for tourism, we did find that a large tourism industry increases the county's fiscal capacity. That one was a little less ambiguous, which then can decrease its state share funding under TISA. Then the only other thing I'd like to add, Chairman, before I turn it over to Ismail and Michael, is that at a bare minimum, one of the things we would like to have the Commission eventually recommend is that the locals report, when they already report their count of virtual students to the state. We can get that information from the Department of Education. What we don't have visibility on, what the department doesn't have visibility on, is where that student is from. So in other words, Bradley County might have 100 virtual school students. We don't know if how many of those are from Bradley County, how many are from Polk County. And that seems like it should be a fairly easy thing for the virtual schools and the locals to report to the Department of Education. If we had that kind of information, we could have done considerably more analysis on the effects of moving those students rather than just taking them out of the model. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Ismail.
Thank you, Director Lippard. Ismail, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Ismail Tanui, and I'll be presenting to you the findings on distortions in fiscal capacity caused by virtual students counts. Virtual school students distort TACIR fiscal capacity calculation, which can result either in an increase or decrease in the fiscal capacity for counties. For the school year 2025-26, virtual school students decreased the fiscal capacity through the local revenue and tax-based variables because it increases the ADM, that is the average daily membership, in their denominators. Virtual school students also increase the fiscal capacity through the service responsibility factor because it increases the ADMs in the numerator. And also, virtual school students increase the multiple that is used to calculate the total fiscal capacity for each county. The output of the multiple linear regression model gives us the fiscal capacity per pupil. And for us to get the total fiscal capacity for a county, we have to multiply by the ADM. That causes an increase in the total fiscal capacity for that county. Virtual school students are counted as enrolled in the school system where the virtual school is located, rather than their residency. These students increase the host county's service responsibility variable, that is the number of public schools, the number of public school K-12 students that the county has to serve as a percentage of the total population. The Department of Education does not have the residency data for students who are attending the virtual schools, and for purposes of this analysis, the Commission staff reached out to Union County, which has the largest number of virtual students. The ADMs is 2,685 out of the total ADMs 5,730. Also, Johnson County is the second largest county that has got the virtual students. And for Johnson County, the number of virtual ADMs is 2,893 out of the total 4,501. If we turn to Table 1, it shows us the state share of total PEP funding for Union and Johnson County schools from the school year 2017-18 to school year 2022-23. For Union County, we realized that the state share of funding increases from 88.9% in the school year 2017-18 to 93.2% in the school year 2022-23. Johnson County began hosting a virtual school in the year 2020-21, and the county's state share percentage of PEP funding increased from 80.5% that year to 90.2% in the school year 2022-23. Table 2 shows us the state share of total TACIR funding for Union and Johnson County schools from the school year 2023-24 to school year 2025-26. And for Union County, the state share of funding increases from 94.0% in the school year 2023-24 to 94.3% in the school year 2025-26. For Johnson County, their state share percentage decreased from 93.2% to 92.8% in the school year 2025-26. TACIR provides base funding, weighted funding, direct funding, and outcomes funding. Only the PACE and the weighted funding are equalized. Direct and outcome funding are 100% funded by the state and are not equalized. Figure 2 shows us the statewide average daily membership of virtual schools from the school year 2019-20 to school year 2024-25. And from that figure, we realized that the enrollment in virtual schools has been increasing over time. In the school year 2019-20, the enrollment was 3,872, and it increased all the way up to the school year 2024-25. The enrollment is the enrollment, that is the ADM, is 14,495. Figure 3 shows us the state funding of virtual schools from the school year 2019-20 to 2023-24. And it shows that as the virtual ADMs has been increasing over time, also the state funding has increased from $30 million all the way to $98,000 million in the school year 2023-24. The data that we used here is from the virtual education report, that is from the Department of Education. And the latest data we had from This is 2023-24. We don't have the data for 2024-25 and 25-26. That marks the end of my presentation, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Ismail, thank you for that report. Are there any questions from members of the committee? Senator.
Yeah, thank you. This is a basic question. It's not necessarily about this data, but just so I fully understand, part of the reason we're having this meeting, and I'm referring on this question just to the virtual schools, are the counties that have that are sending the virtual students, or the virtual students are utilizing the virtual schools, are they the ones that's being hurt in a negative capacity, or is it the counties that have the virtuals? I'm just trying to figure out, where the problem is on the virtual schools.
And Ismail, correct me if I'm wrong. It depends, Senator. It depends, and it varies from year to year. But the distortions, because it's in the ADM, and the ADM is not, it's in so many of the different factors. It depends on which factors are the relative weights of those factors from year to year. So, if as in past years, this has tended to decrease the fiscal capacity of the host counties, that then hurts the other counties, all else being equal. But as we've seen in this year, because of that interplay, it's actually in some cases it has actually increased the fiscal capacity. For example, in Union County this year, which then, all things being equal, would actually hurt them relative to other counties. So it's more our concern is more with the distortion from just the way the attendance is being reported. Now, though, because the funding, those counties still do receive the additional, the host counties still do receive the additional funding that's tied to those students. So it hurts them only in terms of their fiscal capacity. Now, how that washes out versus how much more money they have from having those students as part of their attendance, that's a different matter. Correct, Melissa? Yes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had two questions, if I may. One is just kind of a clarification, and I don't want to step in it, so I apologize if I ask a question. I know residency requirements have been around at the college level for in-state, out-of-state, or at least some sort of proof. It seems like that would be a logical step to at least study as a very simple reporting mechanism. It's already, it wouldn't be reinventing the wheel. But my question is it's interesting that the economy, so it's $7,877 when you had roughly 3,700 students. And now we're hitting some economies of scale. When the ramp up, it's roughly $6,700 per virtual student. My question would be is where are those hit points along the way as you look at virtual schooling? Because I think as a parent of 3 elementary age students, and many who have had kids probably go through already, I would never view virtual school as the answer, but certainly it is a heck of a complement to skill sets all the way through life, myself included, looking at UT Extension for some ag classes as we look at property in Arkansas. So those would be the things that I would want to know if I were shaping up the formula to have, and that's just mainly for me wanting the context. It may not change the output, but certainly would give me a more informed understanding of virtual school from a funding perspective on what is each and every student getting, how does it impact the county, and then how does it impact my county partners, especially when we're in the corner. We have to constantly think about, even though maybe we don't do it as well sometimes, how our decisions impact our partners. So those would be some of the things that I would like to see kind of shaped up, but really those kind of economies of scale of how that you could potentially look at it maybe through a different lens. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No, I just agree. I agree with the councilman's comments. I really don't have anything to add to it. That is the kind of information that ideally you'd want to get to. Having the residency information of each of the students would be an important step toward that.
And I also agree, and that was part of the discussion that the director and I had yesterday about that. Seems to be low-hanging fruit and seems to be very easily gained information. In our discussion yesterday, Mr. Director, there's actually one county that seems to have students not even from the state of Tennessee, as I recall.
Correct. The information, and now what we don't know, Chairman, and before we go, pointing fingers at the county, we don't know if that was before they have residency information before they moved to the state, or if they started and they moved out. We don't know the details behind, and we're talking a small number of students, but it is still concerning when you see residency outside the state.
Well, and I think the Ismail's PowerPoint title page said distortions, and I think that's a very appropriate term. I think it's distorted right now, and we need clarity.
Yes, sir. If I may, I would add, to make it an apolitical statement, I always appreciated the late Fred Smith. Everybody wants to know where your customers are, where they're coming from, and where they're going, so that you can address their needs to a more customized level. Sam Walton was the greatest at it. And so I would say, again, from a business mindset of running the business of the school system in the state, I would want to know that information about my customers so that I could cater to their needs, both your constituents as taxpayers and as users. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Director wanted to make a follow-up, and then Senator.
Just a quick follow-up. Yeah, and I just want to clarify. The schools seem to know, the local and certainly the contractors and where they work with contractors know this information. It's just reporting that information to the state so that at a state level the taxpayers can view that. Correct.
Senator?
I mean, one question I have, just why is each child that's enrolled in the system included in the first place in the formula? Let's think about it like that. And really, what's the answer to that? Like, why do we include each of the students attending as part of our way of calculating what this number is?
So, and I may invite Melissa to weigh in on this also, because she's been involved with this formula far longer than I have. But I think if you look at it in the terms of how the model was first, how the fiscal capacity was first used within the basic education program, the BEP. BEP was a component-based model where you estimated the actual cost of each of the components that are necessary to provide education, and it was centered around the school, but those costs were driven by the number of students. Much like the TACIR is a student-based model, but when you really got under the hood of the BEP, so was the BEP. It's just that was filtered through the components at the school level. So it costs so much to provide education to a student. You need so many teachers. You need so much classroom, and so knowing how many students you have and whether they're physically located somewhere or virtually located somewhere will have an effect on those costs.
Well, and I think that's gets to my point, which is the student count is considered to consider cost, and virtual students have a different cost basis than resident students. They just do. I mean, frankly, the county school that where a student leaves and attends a virtual school somewhere else, they're still in the long run on the hook for the physical space that student's going to need if they decide to leave that virtual school at some point. I mean, there's just a whole category of significant costs that school systems face that are just not relevant to virtual school students. And I mean, I think the promise of, like, if you look at the promotional materials of virtual school, they would talk about its scalability and decreasing cost as numbers scale. And so, I mean, I think the premise of the virtual school is that it's less cost. So it strikes me as just kind of inherently problematic that we're counting students who impose different costs. We're treating them identically under what's supposed to be a mathematical formula, right? I mean, and it doesn't seem, I'm sure that there's complications and weird jump points, but the overall trend is just kind of hard to miss, where, a county goes from the state picking up 78% of its education funding in a year to, and that's not long ago, that's 2017, 2018, to being at 93% now. I mean, the other one's going all the way up to 90, the state's picking up 94%, and the locals contributing significantly less per pupil. I mean, I think that there's the fact that you've seen the growth in this area indicates that counties recognize that there's revenue to be gained that outweighs the cost to be born, and I just think we have to deal with that because it's a distortion.
Director Lippert?
And at the risk of getting a little bit too far over my skis, one of the things we would like to model is the possibility of, if we were able to get the residence information for the students, is perhaps within the fiscal capacity, counting them in the ADM of their resident county for some factors, such as the tax-based factor, but then counting them in the ADM of the host counties for other measures, primarily the dependent variable, the local revenue, to accurately reflect that they are spending this money, but then also to show how it's affecting their capacity. We think if you could, there may be ways without taking virtual students entirely out of the model to assign them to ADMs to more accurately reflect and possibly reduce the distortions. But we don't know that without having that information to try that.
Well, and I think that's well stated, but because I think that the real question here is it's one of cost, right? I mean, every student in a public school is going to be subject to, like, not just the building facility, but the administrative work that comes with evaluating students. I don't think that we actually have. I don't think we incur those costs in the same way at a district level. There at least seem to be some questions that the finance chair, asked about. How are we actually, even doing some of these things? So, I mean, I think figuring out which costs actually follow and which don't. I know that's a little tricky now that we but I do think figuring out that there is at least a significant difference in those costs is a big deal.
And I think that's an important point. There's a significant difference. We're not saying there aren't some costs that are incurred through having virtual students that aren't incurred with traditional students. So it's just figuring out what those relative costs are.
Chairman Crawford?
Thank you. And Dr. Lippert, I got a couple clarification questions. One being, through that discussion there, is it a possibility that the money that's being allocated for these kids, could they possibly be counted in the state of Tennessee at the virtual school, wherever it's located, and also to out of state, if they're actually living out of state, but they're attending virtual school?
I assume it is possible, Chairman. We don't know that is the case. Like I said, for example, with the where we saw the residency of, I think, was it 4 or 5 students that are potentially out of state. We don't even know we need to do some follow-up to determine if those students are even really out of state. I would think there'd be some safeguards to prevent that. It could just be a reporting glitch for all we know. But so, yes, I think there's the potential for that, but I don't know if it's what's actually happening, Chairman.
Mr. Chairman? My second question would be on the situation where a student isn't, let's say they're enrolled, they live in Shelby County, but they enroll themselves in a virtual school in Davidson County. The reason that can be done, and could it hurt the locals for that money that follows the child? Could it hurt them? Because the way I understand it, and this is what I want clarification on, the money would go to wherever the virtual school is, not where the student lives.
That's correct. Under TISA, the money follows the student.
Thank you, Chairman. You bring up an interesting point of, should it be a limited, if a Shelby County resident should only be allowed to have virtual school access in the county of their residence? And that's yet another discussion topic. Any other comments or questions for Mr. Ismail? All right. If there's no Nothing further, Mr. Director. Should we move on to our next tab?
Yes, please, Chairman. Research Director Michael Mount.
Dr. Mount?
Thank you, Chairman. Commissioners, I'm Michael Mount, and I'll be presenting on the Greenbelt and later on counties with large tourism industries. But first I'll cover the effect of Greenbelt property on assessments on fiscal capacity. Designating a farm or residential property as Greenbelt in the county can increase or decrease the county's fiscal capacity in TACIR's model. This is because decreasing residential farm property assessment for Greenbelt purposes or for any other reason decreases the county's property tax base and decreases the residential and farm property as a percentage of total assessments. And these two effects partially offset each other. Property owners in Tennessee can apply for Greenbelt status to reduce the property tax owed for that property. Once a property qualifies for Greenbelt status, it is assessed based on its current use, such as agricultural, forest, or open space, rather than its market value.
This call will be recorded.
Ready? Okay. This valuation approach supports land conservation and agricultural sustainability, but also results in lower property tax base.
This call is no longer being recorded.
Okay. Counties with large rural or agricultural areas. Tennessee state law establishes three classifications for Greenbelt properties. First, agricultural land requires a minimum 15-acre tract used fully or partly for agricultural purposes, which may include woodlands and wastelands as part of the tract. If a landowner initially qualifies a minimum 15-acre tract, an additional tract of at least 10 acres will qualify if both tracts are being used as a farm unit. The land is assumed to be an agricultural production if the $1,500 annual income minimum is reached, and approximately 95% of Greenbelt valuations in Tennessee are for agricultural land. Forest land requires a minimum 15 acres of forest that is under a forest management plan, and this may involve little more than an inventory of the trees on the land and a minimum management of the forest over time. And finally, open space land requires a minimum of 3 acres, excluding agricultural and forest land maintained as open space and included within a plan of preservation approved by the state or a local planning agency. The use value is determined by state law and varies depending on land use, either agricultural, forest, or open space, and the location of the property. Additionally, the extent of the acreage that qualifies under Greenbelt significantly affects the amount of tax savings realized. In 2009, TACIR published a comprehensive report on the state's Greenbelt law. This report highlighted several significant issues with the legislation. The effect of Greenbelt property on the local property tax base varies extensively from county to county, significantly reducing the tax base in many counties and likely causing a combination of higher property tax rates and taxes on the property owners not enjoying the Greenbelt status or valuations. The effect on property owners also varies extensively from county to county, with the greatest relative benefit accruing to landowners in urban and other high-growth areas where land value greatly exceeds use value. Greenbelt land in some urban areas can enjoy valuations for tax purposes that are less than 1% of the market value. Rollback taxes, as currently calculated, do not, in most cases, reflect any consideration for the actual selling price of a parcel. that was previously classified as Greenbelt eligible. The 2000 staff report recommended the following options to address the identified problems, though none of these recommendations have been adopted. First, limit agricultural, horticultural, husbandry, and forestry greenbelt subsidies to those who actually depend on such activities for a significant portion of their livelihood rather than engage in them as a hobby. Establish a minimum valuation of greenbelt eligible land equal to 10% of the county assessor's market value of the greenbelt eligible land. Modify the existing rollback tax calculation to include interest on the calculated value of the tax subsidy enjoyed for the 3 years preceding the sale of the property. Modify the existing rollback tax calculation to include the sale price of the land in the year when sold, thereby including in the rollback tax calculation the only true measure of the likely value of that land in the past. Limit greenbelt valuations for open space tracts to only land identified as having outstanding natural values, such as lands owned or identified for acquisition by the Nature Conservancy or similar organizations, and lands with permanent conservation easements. Give county assessors the right to inspect properties for which greenbelt status is requested to ensure that the tax subsidized activity claimed is actually taking place each year. And again, none of these recommendations have been adopted. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions about that.
Thank you, Dr. Mount. And just so I understand, none of those recommendations have been adopted.
Yeah, staff did a review of the Greenbelt statute to ensure that none of them had actually been.
Since 2009. Thank you.
Yeah, right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is very interesting. This is now a subject that I have to dive into. Shelby County in West Tennessee would probably be a heavy hitter on this list, I would think, due to our millage rate and abundance of property, and honestly, shockingly enough, avid hunting property that you can find located within the urban area. My question to you would be, have you taken into any consideration as you study this the indirect benefit of what you're really asking of these property owners? Meaning, I would caution you to not strap down or to reduce the eligibility, but improve the requirements, because in urban areas, often if you've got somebody that is well-heeled or is a landowner in an area with a high millage rate or can afford the carry, et cetera, what you're really wanting is the public benefit out of it if you're going to allow them some sort of deference on the pilot, right? Or on the taxes, which is really what you're talking about, is some version of a pilot program. And then there's a recapture, which if I'm the property owner and I've held and carried it under our agreement and I've improved it and there's open space and I've done all these things that you've asked me to do, much like the WRP program does for avid hunters, on the sale of the property, a recapture really should fall maybe to the, I wouldn't necessarily say that I'd look at that again as an eligibility issue, because then you're putting a financing mechanism on something that's unanticipated and you don't know what the future use is going to be. And your partner, the landowner, has done everything that they've asked you to do. So those would be some very initial thoughts, even on the inspection. Like, I would be very cautious about who that inspector is. I wouldn't put my local commercial building inspectors on land that would definitely require Tennessee Wildlife in order to, again, I view this as a WRP mirror. I think there is a huge opportunity. If you go talk to the guys at Delta Waterfowl and Mississippi State University, urban hunting is going to continue to be a very important thing as we go forward. And I know that sounds insane and crazy, but it's just all part of conservation, wetland, et cetera. And so what I would encourage is to look at what other places may be doing to put more requirements. Because if you said to me, I can reduce my tax rate down for 20 years, but I need to provide wetland conservation or open space, or even I need to have the school system out there 12 days a year for education, I'd consider that, because those are known factors. Clawbacks on an unknown factor or unknown sale basically discourage me from wanting to put any money in my property, including doing earthwork to create the open space. So I would think more about requirements than eligibility. As a real estate developer and an avid hunter, we are in the WRP program in Arkansas. So those would be my things to consider. But I do understand your problem of people basically using them as basically a tax skip. But be careful, cautionary tale. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Lippard.
And those are all good points, Councilman. And even though we included the recommendations from our 2009 study here for context, our main concern here, like with virtual students, was just the effect on Greenbelt within the fiscal capacity model. No. These are all. We have looked at Greenbelt, and we actually occasionally still get calls about Greenbelt ever since Dr. Stan Shervin did that study back in 2009. So this is something that the commission could be asked to look at again. So those are all very relevant points.
Any other comments or questions from the committee? Thank you, Dr. Mount. We'll go to tab 3.
Thank you again, Chairman. Now I'll present on the fiscal capacity of counties with large tourism industries. Increases in tourism-related sales can increase a county's fiscal capacity and decrease state funding for K-12 public education, all else being equal. Tourism generates significant tax revenues for state and local governments in Tennessee. In 2024, visitor spending in Tennessee generated $2.0 billion in state tax revenue and $1.3 billion in local tax revenues. Although other counties have significant tourism industries, tourism and tourism-related tax revenue is a larger part of the tax bases of Davidson and Sevier counties, which you can see on Table 3. Growing sales tax bases in these counties contribute to their fiscal capacities, though other variables contribute as well. Both Davidson and Sevier over the last 5 years have seen increases in their share of statewide fiscal capacity, shown in Table 4. All else being equal, increases in fiscal capacity for a county decrease its state share of education funding. Previously, under the Basic Education Program, or BP, funding formula, a provision in state law established a floor for the minimum of non-classroom funding that a school system could receive at 25%. This had the effect of increasing the state share and decreasing the local share for Davidson and Sevier County schools. No such minimum is included in the Tennessee Investment and Student Achievement Act, or TISA, but TISA does hold harmless districts that fall below the BEP baseline, the last year of BEP funding, with the state funding a declining percentage of the difference through school year 2026-27, though neither Davidson or Sevier have received this baseline funding. There's also a safety net that prevents more than a 5% decrease in the total TISA allocation. For both Davidson and Sevier counties, the state share funding percentages were generally decreasing under the BEP from school year 2017-18 to school year 2022-23, which you can see in Table 5. Both counties saw their state share percentages increase in the first year under TISA but decrease the second year, as shown in Table 6. Included in the state share is direct and outcomes funding. These are 100% funding by the state and are not equalized. TISA provides base funding, weighted funding, direct funding, and outcomes funding. Only the base and the weighted funding components are equalized, and again, the direct and outcome fundings are 100% funded by the state and not equalized. The direct funding amounts for Davidson and Sevier are shown in Table 7. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Mount. Any comments or questions from members of the committee? Senator?
Thank you very much. And I think that, yeah, I mean, this is particularly relevant. I mean, I think part of this, I think, is just trying to help try to help people understand where the challenges are here. And I mean, I think that this has been a persistent issue in Sevier County, and I think that, but it's also been a growing one in Davidson County as well. But I think there's part of it is that the population, like we actually consider how many people live in most of these places. The wealth that's coming in for a lot, or the property values that are considered, the sales tax revenue that comes in the tourist economies is coming from a lot larger group of people. And it's actually has to serve a lot larger group of people, right? I mean, Davidson's population may be 700,000. There hadn't been a day in the last 2 years, since COVID that we haven't had more than 800,000, 900,000 people in this city every day, right? Yeah, it's probably significantly higher. And so the costs that come along with that tourist economy are pretty significant in terms of the infrastructure needs, the energy needs, the security needs that are just, they're not apples to apples, when you're comparing to counties that don't have those challenges. And I think where this becomes something that is an issue for the state is, I mean, look, people like, the state has a priority of investing in tourism development, and it should. It is, we're externalizing a lot of revenue generation from people from out of the state. They're contributing to the state's economy. And then through Davidson and Sevier and other tourist locations, to be fair, we're using that to subsidize the government that everyone receives, right? And most directly in Davidson and Sevier, I mean, what that is clearly some of the subsidy. And I think the challenge here is when it can feel as if you are penalized in your the state's education investment because we're investing in the tourism development. And you can't actually access those dollars or rely on them in the same way. We did go through COVID. Like the tourism economy is a lot more volatile thing. Just because we have those people in our community spending dollars doesn't mean that everybody in the county actually has that sort of a wealth. It doesn't mean that is a permanent source of our ability to fund schools primarily through property taxes. And frankly, it also comes on the other side because both the tourism economy makes the counties look wealthier than they are, right? It just does. So our people are, if we lost that tourism economy and we had to generate that same tax burden, it would be devastating to people, and especially so in Sevier and in Davidson. And so trying to figure out something like where there is some sort of, like we did, this was considered before. I mean, I think that the minimum that was used in BP 2.0 legislation was a pretty considered thing that I think would have helped Sevier and Davidson, dealing with the fact that of where the cost differences are. But there is something, it seems fundamental about the fact that when you're so much of your so-called fiscal capacity comes from the source of revenue that's not really your constituents and doesn't really serve your constituents' needs and doesn't account for the increased cost that your communities face. And I think that's the big piece, is that it's just not fair to say, yes, we have this fiscal capacity, and if you're comparing that fiscal capacity apples to apples with every other state, that's true. But we have fiscal costs that generate that capacity that aren't apples to apples with the rest of the state. And I think trying to figure out how we actually account for that, or at least acknowledge it, would be a useful thing.
Thanks, Senator. Director Lippard.
And those are all valid points. I would say one thing we do have in the TACIR fiscal capacity model, to get at some of that is that's the rationale for part of the rationale for the inclusion of the per capita income measure, because the argument being just because you have the large tax base doesn't mean your residents have the capacity to pay those higher taxes related to that base. So that's really honestly one of the reasons I think our model is still included in TIS, although there was discussion of going purely to the CBER model, as there was in 2007 when they went to BEP 2.0. But because of factors like the per capita income measure, those counties like Davidson Sevier tend to do better in our model than the CBER model, and so we are still part of the model.
No, and I very much appreciate that. I think that the use of the per capita income is remarkably helpful. I would also sort of just note that the tourism economy also drives up the cost of property and housing in both places. So in both places, the amount of that income that ends up getting spent on property ends up going higher as well. And so, I mean, look, I know that it's difficult to have a formula that accounts for every detail in a place, but this does seem these issues have popped up over time for a reason, and I think that being serious about how the CBER model and this model deal with that is a useful thing, or just acknowledging it that there's gonna be variations and figuring out some way that we're making a policy adjustment to make sure that state investment stays solid.
Director?
I just do want to add, just to be fair to CBER, Dr. Fox has in the past argued that the CBER model tangentially captures the effect of income, but I just want to put that out there.
Thank you, Director. Any other comments, questions for Dr. Mount? Councilman?
And maybe it's just worth an email later, but I did wonder on the inputs, on the components, if there was a weighting to them. If you weighted income, median household income over another, take Memphis, for example, right? It's not the best example because there are many factors about its fiscal position. We are where we are based on a series of prior decisions, is what my father used to tell me. But one of those is like we are a tourism economy for the most part, so we have to make huge infrastructure bets in order to place that, right? So, but ultimately, I'm just curious about where that would register in the formula of trying to find that. And again, any model, and really it goes back to what the senator was saying, is what I've seen through formulas at any governmental level is the inability of their flexibility. And what you're trying to do is give stability to whatever the receiver is. So if it's the school system, they want some sort of ability to budget for. Got it. Appreciate that. The problem is like Memphis, the community development block grant formula has been around since the early 70s, and the federal government refuses to change it, even though it is completely out of date. And that is how they give every dollar away, as this body knows probably better than anybody, better than I do. And so I think what the senator is saying has merit, which is probably more of a statutory legislative issue, which is, can you find a formula that has annual or a triennial way to every 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it needs to be, to have that flexibility so you're not moving a legislative mountain to respond to rapidly changing economic environment and needs.
Director?
Well, either Michael or Ismail are infinitely more capable of probably answering this question, but I'll take a stab at this in that because we use a regression model, a behavioral regression model, the idea is that the model itself sets the weights, and those weights adjust every year. The weights of the coefficients are actually the weights that are used for each of the factors, and those weights are set by the actual interplay between those dependent variables and the independent variable, what's actually being spent.
Theoretical should.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Doc.
If there are no other comments or questions for our presenters, thank you both, gentlemen. Very grateful. We will go to our Next Steps tab, and I will turn it back over to Director Lippert and ask for, in addition to next steps, let's talk about next meeting, September 18.
Thank you, Chairman. So yes, the next meeting of the full commission is September 18th, and the question is what we report back to the full commission. What I would propose is that we report back the summary conclusions and to include a copy of the memorandum that was discussed here. Our question for the subcommittee members, if there are any potential recommendations you would like for the commission to consider, or additional research to consider, I would staff would certainly entertain the idea of a recommendation that the commission recommend that the state collect information on the county of residence of each of the virtual students. Our thinking is that would allow additional analysis to determine what, if anything, can be done to reduce the distortions of the virtual component. I don't have any specific recommendations that we would propose on the tourism or Greenbelt at this time, but hopefully you may, or the commission may, once this information is presented to them. I wasn't anticipating another meeting of the subcommittee, at least not yet, Chairman. But so that's where we sort of see this going, is report back the findings to the full commission, along with maybe a potential recommendation on recommending that reporting on the residency, and then looking at it further in future as we're able to do more analysis.
Thank you, Director. I think at a minimum, the recommendation of reporting county of residence from this subcommittee to the full committee that will meet on 18 September. I'm seeing acknowledgments. Do we need to take a voice vote?
I think a voice vote's fine.
Sure. All in favor of the recommendation of the county of residence to be included in a recommendation in addition to this memorandum being presented to the full committee? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Thank you, Chairman Hicks. We record that aye. That is unanimous from the subcommittees. Senator Yarborough, you had a comment?
So two thoughts where I do think it might be helpful to have some. I hate to think of things for the wonderful staff at TACIR to do, but I mean, I do think that we have some research on what we think, percentage of cost. So speaking first to the virtual, but like thinking through if we were going to, allocate a portion of a student to, of the cost of a student from a virtual to school, like what portions would be appropriate? Like what percentage do we usually apply for those sort of administrative, transportation, food, the, physical space that we know don't carry? And I mean, and if there are costs that are incurred by virtual that are not incurred by other students, that would be appropriate as well. But I think recognizing that there might be some cost, and if there's any existing data about that, I think would be helpful. As to the tourism economy piece, I actually am curious, it's not an unusual thing, right? I mean, in terms of every state in the country has, has faced issues about trying to make sure that you're equally funding education despite the fact of revenue differentials in various counties. And so I am curious as to whether other states who have confronted this have adjusted in any particular ways. Where they have, maybe Orlando, I mean, there are other places where there are significant tourism economies, and do they factor in the same way in other states' education formulas? I don't have any, sense of what that is. It might be that they don't, and they deal with any adjustments on a legislative basis. But I think it would at least be good for us to know whether we're within the mainstream, or whether there's other ways other adjustments that people other than us have reached to solve to address these issues.
Thank you, Senator. Director Lippard?
No, I think those would both be things that we could attempt to get additional information on. I'm not sure we'll be able to get that together in time for the next meeting, but there's nothing to prevent us from reporting it at the meeting after that. If we don't have it by the September meeting, I think there would be good information to have. Senator Briggs was also.
My apologies, Senator. Yeah, thank you. This is your chamber. My apologies.
No. Yeah, thank you, Mayor Brooks. I have two comments. One that deals with how the tourism money is allocated is something that the counties and the state's been struggling with in the courts for 25 years. And I know going back a long time ago when I was on the county commission, the counties that are the net donors to the state always feels like that they're donating too much. The rural counties feel like they're not getting enough. And there's some very good arguments made on that, particularly where, for instance, Knox County, which is my home county, we have large shopping areas. And the money that's collected in the sales tax there isn't all coming from Knox County residents, because we have people coming in Union County, for instance, where there's a virtual school. We have them come in for Scott County and some of these relatively poor, Cock County, relatively poor counties. And that's the arguments that they've made. I know that if you go back to the early 2000s, that this thing's been going on now for a quarter of a century at least that I'm aware, maybe longer. But the state legislature changed some of this with legislation where the urban areas or the large donors got more of their money back. Then there were suits by the rural areas. They felt like that they weren't getting enough. The courts would rule in those favors. So that is something that I think is going to be, very difficult to come up with some sort of solution on. And even if we do legislatively, it could very well end up in the courts by whoever comes out on the short end of that. The second thing, and Mayor Brooks is aware of this also, and this alludes to what Senator Yarbrough was just talking about looking at other states. And sometimes, we always talk about at the state level that we're the laboratories for innovation, and we don't always have to invent the wheel. But the National Council of State Legislature keeps a very large database of bills that have been proposed, bills that have been passed, who did it. And I actually go to that fairly often. And sometimes there's some really good bills, or what sounds like really good bills that are passed. I've called the legislator who passed those. How did that work in your state? And I know I've passed some really good bills that nothing ever happened. It just was never, there were options there and it was never utilized. But on the other hand, there's some that have passed. You could say, this has worked out really well. And, we've used those as model bills, done the Tennessee tweak on them to make them fit what we do here. And that may be another, another source that we can look at to see if other places, have had issues with this. And not only just see what sort of legislation has been proposed, but then talk to people and say, how did that work?
Thank you, Senator. Director Lippard.
I'll address your first comment first on the business centers like Knox County and Davidson County that have a large retailing and have a lot of business from outside the county. Actually, the fiscal capacity model does attempt to capture that, or at least part of that. If the factor that's called the resident tax burden or the taxpayer equity, that's the ratio of residential and farm assessment to total assessment. We used to express that as the ratio of commercial property to total assessment. We actually changed it just to make the sign flip the right way to make it more consistent. So and Dr. Harry Green, who developed the TACIR version of this model, referred that as a tax exportability measure, the ability to export some of your residential tax burden to people coming from outside. If you have a lot of business, then the idea is that some of that tax burden is being picked up by people from outside the county. I would add, though, I don't know if that's as an important a point as it used to be. Now that with the growing importance of online sales and that sale is now associated with the county of the purchaser, their resident county, not the county where it's purchased from. So that has helped even out some of that, I think. I'm not going to go into the nexus. the nexus of the sale. So it's not as big. I'm not saying it's not still an important factor, but you're right. How you capture that, you get into all kinds of legal concerns, and it's difficult to do. On your second point, we're very well aware of NCSL, and they're one of the sources we use. Every study we do, not just this type of analysis, we include a 50-state review, and that often includes NCSL and other organizations, and calls to other state and local jurisdictions to find out just how well that works. So we absolutely agree with you on that, Senator.
All right. Any other further closing comments or concerns of the subcommittee? I'm very grateful, first of all, to Senator Yeager for putting this subcommittee together. He was not able to be here. I'm also thankful he let us use the Senate hearing room. For those of us in the House, we used to not be allowed in here often. So thank you, senators, for allowing us to be here, and thank you, Director, and to all the presenters today who did such great work, and for the recommendations that were given. We will ask that the staff prepare that and get that to the full committee for our 18 September. And unless there is nothing further, Mr. Director?
I have nothing further, Chairman.
We are adjourned. Safe travels home.